Business Connections Live, the UK's leading online business channel. This is Business Connections Live with Steve Hyland.
Hello there, welcome along. This is Business Connections Live, the program for entrepreneurs, SMEs and business owners. Now, today's show, we're going to be discussing redeveloping citizen trust in a world of skepticism. Joining us in the studio today is Jerry Brown, the customer lifeguard and co-founder of the Citizen Connection, and David Wales, who is the founder of Shared Aim and co-founder with Jerry of the Citizen Connection too. It's going to be a cracking show today. Looking forward to it. Jerry, it's lovely to have you with us, and David, thank you very much for coming in to the studio today, and it's great to meet you as well. Before we start, let's just get a little bit of background of the pair of you. Jerry, I've spoken to you before, so I'm going to invite David, first of all, to give us a little background and just tell us who you are. This is your 1 minute pitch. So who are you and what do you do?
Well, thank you very much. I've arrived here probably from a slightly unusual route. I've had a career in the fire service, and during that had the opportunity to travel wide and work at a number of different levels, both in the UK and abroad, and really understand how policy comes to be. But the thing that really turned me towards understanding the citizen side was when we looked at human behaviour, and we tried to answer the question of why people didn't behave as we expected them to when we attended fires. And much of that was really with a view that we would then change their behaviour to one that we thought was more preferable. As an experienced fire officer of 20 years at the time, I sat down with some people and said, your story, your words. And as they told me the story of their experience of a fire, it just struck me very, very quickly that it was completely different to mine as a professional going to work to do the job I'd chosen to do against somebody who had this enforced upon them. Theirs was very much an emotional story. It was very contextualised. It was very personal. Mine was a chance to put into place procedures and training that were fairly standardised but adapted for that particular circumstance. And so that difference in my experience and theirs was quite fundamental, and we carried that study on for a number of years. It went from a local study to a national study, attracted international interest. But at the heart of it was really understanding it's not either or. The services have a role, they're set up for a reason to deliver good public services, and by and large they do. But it's important to understand the context of that and the human and the very individual needs of the people that they're for. After all, that is the point of the public services. It's
interesting, because when I've spoken to you, Jerry, in the past, we've talked about customer service.
Yes.
And that's a very interesting, what David was saying is a very interesting positioning of what this is all about. We meet people on a daily basis, we communicate with people, we don't appreciate though what their issues are, where their standpoint is, where they're coming from, but yet we are ready to complain, we're ready to fight our corner. For those people that don't know you, just a little bit about yourself, Jerry.
Well, as I've had the opportunity to present before, Steve, I've been very involved in customer service for most of my business life, and as customer experience became a more intrinsic part of a business operation, I became very focused on helping organizations improve their customer experience, but both from a strategic perspective but also from a technology perspective, because I had a strong background in technology. And I found what was happening is organizations did a lot of the right things in terms of helping their people become better at interacting with customers, with being able to be more empathetic, all of those good things that we hear about it, but quite often they were let down by the technology. So I tend to bridge those two domains, if you will, to help organizations both create a great strategy, but also to operationalize customer experience. And when I met David and heard, of course, the things he's already articulated, I realized that I had if you like, I had a very much a kindred spirit, but on the public sector side. And I thought there's clearly an opportunity here for someone with his background, his tremendous experience, and also the way that he looks at things. We found out there were different personalities, which I think is a very good thing. And therefore, we've felt that we've begun to meld together into this citizen connection to be able to help citizens, you and I. How do we, it goes beyond just getting our bins collected on time, but it kind of starts there. And how do we improve this? And we want to look at it from both the public sector side, whether that's local or central government, but also the citizen side. What do we do to help them get a better deal, if you like, from the people that effectively they employ to do their services?
The Citizen Connection sounds, dare I say this, and you can beat me up after the programme, ever so slightly Orwellian, doesn't it?
Yes, indeed.
The citizen. But it is, local government and local services, fire service, ambulance, hospitals, and local councils and things like that, they are in a difficult place on how they perceive themselves, I think. I was over in France just a couple of weeks ago, and one of my distant relatives is a vineman, and what he does, he tends the vine. But there is a cooperative of 110 of these vinemen, and they run the processing plant collectively, and so they are, to all intents and purposes, the owners of this processing. And I thought, actually, that's how local councils work. We as citizens are the collective. We collectively own the council in many respects. But they don't get very much of the money we pay them, though, do they? And is that where the problem is, that they are strapped for cash and we expect all these services? We spend our £3,000 a year in council tax and we think it's all going to them, when in fact only a small percentage is. So they're strapped, so they can't maybe get the best personnel, the best people, they can't provide the best service. Yep. So they're between a rock and a hard place.
I think that's certainly one of the things that we would have to look at in terms of money is always going to be the issue for everyone. The reason we looked at the Citizen Connection, to your earlier point, from the research we've undertaken, we looked around at how do we improve that relationship with the public, how do we create a better understanding between the service we deliver and the needs of the people that we provide the service to. As a result of that, I became the first fire and UK customer experience manager in the fire service, which was a fantastic opportunity to bring in some of the methodologies.
So what do you ask them? How do we do? Do we put the fire out? Yes? No?
What we found, actually, the fire service is in a tremendous position that it helps people at a time of great distress.
Of course.
And so we had great customer satisfaction generally.
Absolutely.
Very
they put the fire out. Tick.
But actually, one of the unusual features for us was that in doing so, we didn't get a lot of feedback. So if you compared us to perhaps the health service and the police, we wouldn't get the same level of feedback about where we could do better, because to an extent what people looked at is what we achieved for them, the fire's out. Rather than did we do it best, did we consider them individually? And so actually the feedback we was getting was in some ways a barrier to development. So you already pointed about.
But that's perceptions, isn't it? That's the public perception of the service that the fire service provides.
And what we found for the internal customers, the people within the service, there was a resistance in some ways to the customer experience language, because of course they do a fantastic job. They're hearing that from the public, and so to then sort of bring this in was a little bit of confusion. And when Jerry and I met, we had quite a long discussion about it. I said, it is distinct. The methodologies that you'd use in customer experience absolutely apply, but being sensitive to the legitimate concerns of those employed in the public sector and to the slight differences of most of the public services and monopoly, then actually there are some fundamental differences. And so the more we thought about it, we thought if we create a better awareness of what a citizen experience is, then actually.
So what did they say to you? What was the thing that came out? I mean, we've talked around it. So what was probably the most common thing that they would say to you that you went away and you went, wow, I didn't realise that. Gosh, that's an insight. That's insightful.
There was a couple of things that really stood out. One, we did a volume in the county I was working in, and the most common question that people asked when we phoned them back about a week later was, I've got tins of food and packets of food. They were unopened. Can I use them? And I thought, it just struck a line of thought, and I'd never worried about that. I'd been worried about getting fire plants ready to go to the next job to help somebody else.
Yes.
And of course what we've done is given somebody who an hour ago had a perfectly normal family house, given it back to them, and they're now thinking, that's great, but I've still got to feed the family, I've still got to, all those everyday tasks quickly come back in. And we were unprepared, and we hadn't really thought about, so can you use those packets?
Is that the same, do you think, in for local councils as well, that what they're doing there? I liken this to, we do quite a lot with the AA, and of course what happens is you're driving along in your car breaks down, you phone up the AA, and they come out to you. For the patrol who attends you, that job is starting when they get there.
Right.
For you, the drama started when you broke down, and it may continue because you may be on your way to the airport. Mm-hmm. So in many respects, the patrol is a bit part player in your personal disaster. And I suppose the same applies to what you were doing. Do you think the same applies to the councils?
It does indeed. And I think, again, thinking back to the name, the Citizen Connection, is that what you've just mentioned, Steve, is relevant in all aspects of our interactions, whether it be with private sector or public sector. Somebody does a portion of it, and how well connected are they to the rest of the organization, so whether that's public sector or not. And of course we're hearing more in the private sector where someone in the customer service role or a customer experience role has total responsibility and ownership for that situation. So if I call in, speak to customer service and complain about something, many times still happens, we're told, oh, that's not my department, I'll transfer you to someone else. So what
Well, just before we came on the air, we were talking to BT.
Indeed.
And it was steady, because we only just made it to air, actually. Yeah. But I mean, we were talking to BT, and I had to talk to somebody to get the broadband sorted. Mm. She did it. At the beginning of the conversation, she couldn't do it. Mm. By the end of the conversation, she was able to pull out all the stops, and she achieved it. And so, and to her, Roanne was her name. Thank you very much indeed. She was absolutely fantastic, and great customer service. I feel, a champion now for BT Absolutely. And their services. However, there was a moment in the conversation when it all could have gone Pete Tong.
Well, I think this is the point, is that this is the same thing that happens to us, irrespective of public or private sector. So what we're seeking to do, because at the end of the day, the cost, if as with private sector, if many people have to touch that, if it takes you longer to sort a problem out, if you have to engage with more people, whatever the things are, as an organization, that costs you more time, it costs you reputationally, and of course we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice as public in the public sector with whom we deal with.
It'd be great if we could, though, wouldn't it?
Well, the thing is that's the point.
Not going with that council, I'm going with that council over there.
Well, there you go. Maybe that will happen one day. I don't know, with all the outsourcing that's going on. But the point being is that it's in the public sector, the local government, whomever they are, it's in their best interest to sort this out and to have, if possible, and it won't always be possible, if you can have one person look after that. So that's where the connection comes in again. How do we connect all of these pieces to make sure that you and I, Joe and Joan Public, get a great service wherever we are?
So what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at analytic strategies as well to identify citizen friction points and roadblocks to success. This could be applying to the organisation that you're in at the moment. Establishment strategic and tactical citizen connection roadmaps. The importance of the difference between conversation and confrontation in addressing sensitive issues. I think the trouble is when we're all complaining, we're already on our high horse, we're already on our soapbox. I'll tell you, and furthermore, my good man, what's your name? Who's your boss? So we're all a little bit like that sometimes. More from my two guests today in just a few moments' time, David Wells and Jerry Brown, on this edition of Business Connections Live. Let's go back nearly a month now. We had August off and it's been great. It's first live programme of this particular season. It's great to have your company as always. Marion Imrie joined me. She's the Chief Executive of Woking and Sambir Hospice, and also Wellbeing Care, about the myths surrounding hospices and hospice care. It was a really interesting programme. From my point of view, being in the situation where this is now becoming something that's very relevant to my family, it showed me a lot of things that are going on within the hospice part, that hospice industry, that really we should all be aware of. Why we see so many of those shops, who the volunteers are, what you get and what they get as well, how they're supported, and how we as a community, as citizens, can also support hospices and care institutions like that in our areas. It was a great show. Marion, just a fantastic young lady, just incredibly knowledgeable. an accountant by trade, has gone into the Woking and Sambir Hospice and is working with them at the moment to turn them around. A fantastic hospice, fantastic representative, fantastic show. If you get an opportunity, go to the website at businessconnectionslive.com. Just to give you some of the key takeaways from the programme, here's Marianne Imrie. Now, on today's show, we're going to be discussing the myths. We're going to be busting the myths about hospice care. Joining me in the studio today is Marianne Imrie. She's the Chief Executive of Woking and Sambir Hospice and Wellbeing Care.
I think most people have the perception that a hospice is a one-way street. You go in and you come out in a box 2 weeks later, and it's really not like that. Lots of people are living so much longer with complex diseases. A very small proportion indeed of our patients die with us. Providing this sort of care is so much more expensive than it was 15 or 20 years ago. 15 or 20 years ago, you would be providing end-of-life care. Now we're providing care that allows people to live longer with diseases, with debilitating conditions. What people see when they think about hospice care is they see the building. But actually there's so much more that we do that isn't within that building. It's out in the community that isn't so visible. It's the girls and boys that will rock up every day to people who are struggling in their own homes, but who want to remain in their own homes. They want to be cared for, they want to live as long as they possibly can within their own home, and some of them eventually want to die within their home. They don't want to go to a hospice. So we have to respect that. I think it's a bit of innovation. It's thinking differently. It's a very different marketplace now. We can't keep doing the same thing. We can't keep relying on fundraising and charity shops to meet the gap, the funding gap between the money we get from the public purse and the cost of developing the business. We can't continue to be this little island that's funded through charitable activity as it has been for 20, 30, 40 years. We need better ways of working, better partnership working. I would like to see better public funding for this service. If as a society we want to provide palliative and end-of-life care in an environment that isn't cheek by jowl within a trust hospital, a busy acute hospital, then we have to fund it properly. Some hospices that may be longer established than our own may have quite significant reserves through legacies, and therefore may be able to continue to function for longer when they're experiencing shortfalls in income. Hospices cannot continue to operate in isolation. We need to reach out to our stakeholder partners, and that's typically trusts and clinical commissioning groups that provide funding to provide better ways of doing things. I think they see us providing a valuable service. I think they don't always feel that they understand how we operate, and they don't always find it easy to access the systems to get care for the patients that they might want to refer. And I think that's one of the things we need to address. But sometimes we have to make very difficult decisions about which patients should receive that care. And that's really tough to ask nurses to choose between one patient over another. So access is based on clinical need, and it's often based on whether the individual has care at home. Are they in a secure environment? Can we continue providing care at home, or do they not have anybody, and therefore the best place for them is to come into the inpatient unit? I'm Marianne Imrie. I'm the Chief Executive of the Woking and Sambir Hospice and Wellbeing team. I hope what you've taken away today is a better understanding of the work that we do. It's not just about end of life, it's about making people's lives more comfortable, more bearable when they have disease or debilitating conditions. I hope you have understood a little more about the work that we do and the funding challenges that we have, and what our aspirations are for the future, which is to develop our services to become an even more relevant part of the local health economy. If you're listening and thinking about how as a business you could get involved, I think you should come and talk to us. I think you hopefully will have had an understanding about how your skills, your expertise, your passion, the energy of your teams could work well with us, could support us, but could use us as well to network with other local companies in a similar position. And I think that's, if I've done nothing else but made you think about that today, then my job is done.
That's a great show. If you get an opportunity, please do watch the entire programme. Marion Imrie there from the Sambir Hospice in Woking. And I would imagine many of the problems and the issues that their hospice is having will be replicated up and down the UK. So do watch the programme. If there's something you can do in your local area, then that'd be fantastic. Get in touch with your local hospice. Maybe you can volunteer. Maybe you can give some advice. Maybe you can help. Terrific programme. Do go to the website at businessconnectionslive.com. Incidentally, if you think to yourself, by word, I'm enjoying this whole discussion today. Wouldn't it be great to have a program just like that one for your organisation? Turn your readers into viewers. If you're sending out newsletters at the moment, here's something that's going to be slightly more interactive and it's actually going to just grab their imagination. It's real people talking about real topics. You could do that for your business as well. If you'd like more details about that, well, why don't you just get in touch with us here at Business Connections Live? It's studio@businessconnectionslive.com. That's the email address. Or better still, if you want, you can pick the phone up and give us a call. We're all about talking to people now. 01784 256 777 is our telephone number. Don't forget, you can follow our stream of consciousness as well on BCL Business TV. That's on Twitter. You can also watch the programme and comment too on Facebook. But the best place to go for watching 271 editions of Business Connections Live at the current count, that's over 400 hours of business content, is to go to the website at businessconnectionslive.com. You're watching Business Connections Live. It's great to have your company. We're live here on a Monday. Joining me in the studio today is Jerry Bound, the customer lifeguard. That's how we all know him. He's also the co-founder of the Citizen Connection with David Wales, who also joins me today in the studio. Really interesting, this whole concept around local government and what the citizens expect from it. Do you think we have too high an expectation, do you feel, for our local government establishments?
Well, I think it's like any other aspect of customer experience. We're getting the bar set higher and higher by the organizations like Amazon and others that we put up there as great examples of customer experience. And so people say, well, why can't you do the same thing? Recognizing, as you pointed out earlier, that funding is, of course, under tremendous pressure. And therefore, I do believe that most of us as citizens, when we have our citizens hat on, we do understand that. But I think what we'd like to see and what we hope to generate is more interaction between the citizen and the public sector organization. I think of my own situation, I think no one ever asks me anything. I realize that sometimes we get surveyed to death.
You haven't got the message yet, then.
Well, if they send it, I was out. So I don't know yet whether I've got an opportunity. But I think what I'd like to be able to do is to share more of that. Now, maybe once I had a better understanding of some of their issues, perhaps then my expectations would be a little lower. But yes, of course we have expectations. And the thing is that I mentioned, perhaps in jest, but I'm quite serious about it. You know, my bin men show up at the same time when they're supposed to. They don't make a mess. They always are friendly. And I think that's my interpretation of public sector service. So I think those guys can do it. Why can't they do it in other areas? So yes, we have high expectations. That shouldn't be unusual. And I think it's incumbent upon us to help the public sector to meet those expectations more effectively.
Where do you think, David, we see this disconnect then? Is it the people who are working, the internal teams? Is it particular divisions, departments? Does it differ? Is it different for every local council?
I think every organisation will be slightly different, but there are some commonalities amongst them, and it's a very complex process. Even the example Jerry gives, to have the bins collected, there's a service design, there's equipment procurement, there's equipment maintenance, there's aspirations about what that looks like. Do you organise the bins collection for the convenience of those who undertake the collection, or for those that actually want their bins removed? And I think that if you look at that end-to-end experience, there's huge amounts of complexity. And I think to your earlier point about are we too demanding? I don't think we are. I think in many organisations, whether it's private or public, the status quo is a nice place to be. You get used to how things work. Everyone has their place, they have their role. I think the reality of that is now, though, what we will see as increasingly the fourth industrial revolution comes through, that's not an option. Organisations have to know where their staff add value, and I think they have to actually give them more freedom to exert the skills and knowledge that they bring to the workplace.
Do you think as citizens that we have that we're responsible enough for what we're giving? Because it seems we now live in a society where teachers get threatened, there's violence on the streets. We seem to be slightly more aggressive towards somebody that's in authority or perceived to be in authority, or at least wears a uniform. Do you think that's half the cause of the problem as well, perhaps?
Well, there's no question. I think what's been going on in the world of politics globally, if we see what's been happening here in the US, in the European mainland, populism, of course, is getting a bad name in many ways because we're seeing, as we're seeing now in Hong Kong, tremendous violence taking place. So yes, I don't think there's a question that is a concern. So again, that's where I think it's important for the citizen to be engaged in a way that is more collaborative. It is more understanding of what's going on. And I think these are all old tired cliches, but walking a mile in my shoes, understanding what it's like to be a bin collector. What does that take? It's probably not the greatest job in the world, let's face it, but and would I want to do it? Probably not. But understanding the constraints. So I think this is where I feel this, I keep coming back to the connection. I think we need to do more to engage the public, to have them have an opportunity to understand, and perhaps then, I don't say their expectations should drop, and as David said, I don't think we're being unreasonable, but I think, like anything else, once we get a sense of what it's like to do that, to be in that role, to be able to generate the kinds of services that we're looking for, then perhaps we might be a little bit more forgiving. And I think some of these things that we've been talking about will start to lessen. But it's not an easy issue, and I'm not pretending it is, but I think this whole area of connection, engagement, making sure that we're talking on a regular basis to each other, I think is absolutely vital.
In today's business, everything needs to be measurable. We need to have analytics there, because by doing that we can then see if there's been an improvement. Do you think enough analytical analysis is done of the service that these local government institutions or services like your own, or the fire brigade, ambulances?
I think a lot of it depends how that data requirement is generated, because you cannot see this world as a user from within the ISAJA service. Although we may receive some of the services we use ourselves, we are actually part of the organisation that delivers it. And I think to an extent you have to have the right metrics. And I go back to my earlier conversation with people that had fires. When we went back to them, I thought I understood the process of putting a fire out, which I did. I didn't understand the process of experience of fire.
Of the drama.
But I would now, after that. So we had all the measurements in place, and we still do, around how quickly you get there, and they're all important things. That's not the way that people describe their fires, because actually those factors vary so much for them. Time changes into perception when you're waiting as opposed to when you're doing things. So it's a useful measure for us. But I think the point about the data analytics is you have to start, as we say, talking to people to understand what they perceive the service to be. And I think one of the things that feels like it's changing now is many of the organisations were set up from an institutional basis that did things to society on their behalf, but did them fundamentally too. And I think one thing that's changing now is people don't expect that to be the case. They want to have more of a say. And the point that Jerry was making, I think, is what we're seeing down is actually a breakdown of that communication ability. We often, when we complain about something or we want to understand why something's done, we're met with somebody who's bounded by the organisational process and procedures, and they're unable to do the right thing, because actually what they're more motivated by is compliance with the internal procedures, however useful or in some cases just outdated they are. That is that individual driver.
But this is ingrained all the way through society, isn't it? I mean, one of the things that drives me crazy, if I phone somebody up, or if I phone an organisation up, and they tell me, we're sorry we can't answer your phone because we're very busy right now. Well, then get more people. The fact that you're very busy right now shows me that you're inefficient. You need more people. The other one that drives me crazy is we're having a very busy time at the moment. You are caller number one. That's the other thing that drives me crazy on the phone. But I can see what you're saying. You're talking about the fact that we are trapped in the same way as when I was talking to BT earlier on. The woman was trapped in a process that she didn't have the freedom of thought. Jerry, is that something? But we see that in industry all the time, don't we?
And I think it brings us to this area, into this technology area. We, of course, are hearing more and more these days about AI, artificial intelligence and machine learning and all of this kind of stuff, and where is there a place for this? And to your point about adding more people, of course, what any organization would say was, well, yes, we can go out and hire more people, but then our costs are going to go up, and either our profit goes down or we have to charge more money, or in the public sector, we simply don't have the financial resources to hire more people. So again, that's where it comes back to saying, okay, where are there areas where we could use some of these new technologies to be able to handle some of these issues. So what we're seeing with artificial intelligence, of course, is that many of these things are being handled by, whether it be through a chat bot or something like that. So the initial inquiry, so rather than being frustrated, and it will take some time probably for people to accept that, but if you get better service, faster service, and to a certain extent more effective service, then you're probably going to try these things. So if it's raising a complaint, as an example, just to test my theory on this, I had a situation last week where I live. They have, where the bus shelters are, they have the display boards showing you the time of the bus. One particular display board, which happens to be outside the main train station, which is a really important communications or transportation hub, has been out of action for at least 2 months. And I'm thinking, this is fairly basic stuff. Now, for us youngsters with our smartphones, we can go, oh, look, let's check. But if you happen to be slightly advanced age, I mean, nobody here, of course.
Of course not. Thank you.
Where you're dependent on that, what do you do? And this is a very basic thing. So for me, I look at that. I sent an email. I thought, well, I'll try an email. Then the good news was I had a response very quickly. And it wasn't a response that says we fixed it or we're on it, but it was, we've got your message. We've passed it on to the other department. So again, back to my connection. So now I'm going to be dealing with somebody else. But the point being is, if we could somehow, well, we can, of course, automate that process. And so somebody goes, right, okay, how does that happen? Oh, somewhere in the system there should be a report that says this thing is not working. There may be something that says we are working on it. Of course, it'll be the classic UK excuse, which is waiting for a part. There's a whole book in that, by the way.
Why don't you go back to Canada?
Waiting.
If it's so perfect over there.
Yeah, well, you see, they're going to have a change of government there. It'll all go pear-shaped.
Yeah, it'll go pear-shaped as well.
But the point being is, we do have the capability. I mean, in all seriousness, we have the capability of bringing this stuff together. And David was talking about data. Using data intelligently, the data that we've got, so that somewhere in that system somebody knows that thing isn't working and that this is what we're doing about it. We could automate that process as an example. Now that's a very simple example, I get that, and we recognize that you're going to have to talk to people sometimes, of course you are, but there are ways around this. This is what we want to explore. This is the kinds of discussions we want to have.
More from Jerry Brown and Dave Wells in just a few moments' time here on this edition of Business Connections Live. Let's go back to the 19th of November 2018. Business Connections Live 243, very short little bit here. We often hear the mantra, understanding the customer journey from sale to retention. But what does it really mean? Is it just customer care, or is it a set of processes and procedures? In fact, many of the things you're saying. Is it any of those things? Matthew Ruddle joined me from InTouch CRM. He's now moved on from there, but very heavily involved when it comes to working with CRM systems, customer relationship management systems, about how to win more business, but also how to do more business with existing customers. It was a great show, and with the key takeaways from the program, very short, 25 seconds. Don't blink or it will be gone just like that. But a reminder to watch the entire program if you can, with some key takeaways. Here's Matthew Ruddle.
Hi, I'm Matt Ruddle from InTouch CRM, and the key takeaways from today's show are: implement a process for your sales side as well as your customer retention side, because the moment you do that, things become measurable. You can then change it and you can get success, and you know what works and what doesn't work. So look after your new sales as well as looking after your customers, and it can make a massive difference to your business.
I mean, that's really just what you've been saying, isn't it? You know, you implement a system very quickly, and you're rocking and rolling, because then you have the analytics from it. And an existing customer is always easy to get as well, anyway, isn't it?
Well, of course, in this business, we're all existing customers. That is the challenge. But you're absolutely right, and what Matthew said made a lot of sense. If you've got that. And I don't want, I'm not saying a rigid process, because what you described with your BT experience meant that that person probably couldn't go outside of that. But there's got to have some process. But as long as you've got the data to lean on and to get information from, and that's the important thing. It's connecting again. I keep coming back to connection, because everywhere we look, we're seeing disconnection that's causing this problem. That's why it may sound a little bit flippant, but it is connecting the right people with the right information at the right time to help people fix their issues.
All right, then let's have a look at, this is very interesting, because we always ask our guests to explain a little bit about what they're going to be talking about. I found this fascinating. Why reducing demand for public services is a desirable outcome for all stakeholders. And that seems really contradictory.
Absolutely, and I even made that point. When I say reducing demand, it's just what I was talking about. If you reduce phone demand as an example, that's what I mean by demand. It's a case of in the private sector what we call failure demand, where we've gone out and we've said contact us about something, and then we're not able to support that because either we don't have enough people or we haven't made it clear what the answers are. So being able to reduce demand means either making it easier for you as a citizen to find out what's going on. A good example in this is that actually something that works quite well is if your power goes out in your house. And despite all of the bad press that National Grid have had recently, one of the things I find is if that happens to me now, I can just go online, I can key in my postal code, and what will pop up is something that says, yes, there is a fault at such and such. We expect to have it fixed by this time. Now, that still is a bit of a guess, but at least I know it's been reported. I don't have to call anybody. I may have to go back and check it, but it's that kind of stuff. That's reducing demand. So rather than calling my local provider, I don't have to do that. I've got that information. So it's shifting the burden, if you will, or shifting the ability for me as a citizen to find information to a place where it doesn't affect or doesn't put strain on the organization, whether it be a contact center or whether it be going into the town hall, wherever it happens to be. That's what I'm talking about, reducing demand.
We see this a lot, don't we, David, when we have airline strikes or any form of delay. The biggest criticism is nobody told us what was going on.
Absolutely. And as you join the end of the 8-mile queue on the M25, you think, if only somebody told me just before I joined it, I would have had the option not to sit in there. But I think the point you made earlier is really important. We see costs driving as a negative. I think actually when we keep talking about innovation, startups don't have lots of money to spend. That's where they get the creative, that's the way to get differentiation. I think the reality is there is less money about, and certainly in the public sector that trend is likely to continue other than certain pockets. And I think it's about a mindset then, that if that's the reality of the public sector, we can either take a view that we try and protest and get more money, or we think differently. And I think that's one of the things, to say, Jerry's got tremendous experience in the tech side. I'm much more interested in the human side, and that's why we had the conversations we had. And I think if you can get the organisation to have the mindset, say, OK, that's a problem to solve. We see it elsewhere, that the rise of YouTube, the rise of, if you like, external people volunteering to an organisation, there was a huge capacity and willingness in society to help the public services. At the moment, some of them are very protective and won't take any notice. And if you took a room of 100 people, there's an incredible skill set if we actually talk to them. They're not just people without a view or anything. They each got a story to tell. They've each got stories about the experience they have, the technical skills, and some have got capacity to help either for a one-off piece of work or actually just generally sound out how we're doing. And I think for the public sector there are solutions, but they start to look different to the ones that we've always used. And I think that's where we would hope to say technology is absolutely an essential part of that. It will liberate from the routine, the mundane, and some of the things that we do. But organisations, as well as having a digital strategy, have really got to think, when I say I value my workforce, how do I know them? How do I know how they connect with the customers or the people that use our services? How do we make advantage of that? Because actually it's a really liberating process, but you've got to be ahead of that, because if you're not, then actually what will happen is they'll be the first ones you start to lose through redundancy, rather than to use that in a creative way because you looked ahead to think we can make this much better for everyone. But it is, as Joe said, it's fundamentally a process, and we provide functional services in many areas. The most successful teams, I think, are those that recognise the experience a person will have, and you've got multi-agency teams, and some of those get some incredible results. But they're unusual because we still tend to have this silo functionalist approach to delivering experiences, and I think that disconnect feels like it's becoming much larger.
I think that's the problem, actually. I think society works in silos anyway. Do you think there is a danger, though, that these AI telephony, clever, intelligent telephony systems, the organisations will end up hiding behind them, and will use them as a tool not to communicate with their customer base or their users or their collective owners? Call them what you want. Is there a danger that may happen?
I think I would have said that perhaps 2 or 3 years ago, but many of the conferences I attend, many of the people I speak to, I think there is a tremendous awareness of that potentially happening. So I think organizations are doing as much as they can, and by organizations I mean the people that are perhaps selling these solutions or providing them are becoming much more aware and sympathetic or empathetic to that particular concern. And what David was saying about people, this is where we do involve the people. So the ability, if you think about the example I gave you, I go online, I find there is a chat bot in which I can ask it a question. And so I ask it a question about whether or not this display board is going to work, and perhaps the chatbot says, well, actually I don't know enough about this at this point, but I have collected information from you, I've got quite a lot of detail, I can now pass this on to a real person who can handle that particular inquiry. The technology has existed to do that for quite some time, so there's nothing new about that. Clearly it is about the will to be prepared to do that. So I think that was a concern, but I think there's been enough perhaps negative press about some of the AI implementations that people are realizing they can't just do that. I think the jury is definitely out on whether or not will, when we heard about this first happening, whether or not it will replace lots of workers. That's the other fear. Well, we're not going to have any people. They're all going to be machines. I think, as to David's point about people still want to interact with people, and I think specifically in this area where we all have these experiences now. We're all having experiences, whether it's the ones that you related to from a family perspective. We are all much more empathetic to the situations that we're in, and I think if the people serving us are given somewhat of I'll say a free rein, but more flexibility, empowerment in dealing with us, then I think we'll see this all work out. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but I do think that people are aware of the fact that they can't hide behind these things. They can become a force for good in the right hands.
It's interesting, the persona of both sides has changed, hasn't it? The personality. I remember sitting in a doctor's waiting room a while back, and every sign on the wall was telling me what I mustn't do.
Yes.
It was telling me, first of all, it told me I must be nice to the receptionist because she's only doing her job in a difficult circumstance. But I had no signs of me that said, well, I'm only a patient and I'm going through this process and I feel damn awful and I need some help. And I remember, there have been some critical times, and I feel that personas of the way the public now react to public service workers is maybe I don't know which way it's who started it, is now reacted to by the public service workers in a nearly combative way.
I think we found very much that with the human behaviour study, that as we looked at all the messages we gave the public, both explicit and those that were more discreet, we found we're very paternalistic. So if you're going to have a barbecue this week, we had a list of the things you mustn't do. I've never been to a barbecue where anyone's read that out. And I probably wouldn't stay very long if that was the first thing that they did. And I think you're absolutely right. It's about understanding how do you inform if it's desirable behaviour change, because it's an incredibly difficult thing to do, or do you start to work with it? And as you say, it's how do you get that conversation going to respect the fact that I'll arrive there, I'm not just a patient. And I tend to think of it in the driving, that some days you can get delayed on the motorway, you've got plenty of time, you're in no rush. It's not an inconvenience. So you're quite happy, and you might just think, it's not bad, I can listen to my tape, I can listen to music, whatever you want to do. If I had a call at that moment, I'd be fine. Nobody would know the situation I was in. If, however, as we came here today, we stop, start, you're thinking, it's getting a bit closer now, are we going to make it? Dealing with something at that stage would put me in a very different mindset, as it would if trying to encourage the people in front of you to move and things. So I think what we sort of picked up was, to an extent segmentation works. You can do a profile on me and you'll find out certain things. It doesn't tell you what I'm going to arrive here today like. And I think we need to be better at understanding, exactly as you say, what does that look like on both sides? I need to be respectful of the receptionist. They need to expect there's 101 things that could have happened to me that could put me in an incredibly good mood, or actually be weighing very heavily on my mind when I arrive, and they need to be able to deal with both. And it is, we keep going back to it, that connection to say, I don't know how you're going to arrive, but let's start by inquiring rather than telling you a list of rules that you must obey, because that's not going to help in certain circumstances.
What we're going to do, we're going to try and change your microphone, we possibly can, and I'm just going to tell you a few of the things that you need to do. Do apologise, a little bit of sound problems there on David's microphone, but I'm sure you got the gist of what he was talking about as well. You're watching Business Connections Live. It's great to have your company as always today. My guest on today's program is Jerry Brown, the customer lifeguard and the co-founder of Citizen Connection, along with David Wells. And as always, Gordon, if we can just put the other microphone on that you just we took off me a moment or so ago. He's doing a grand job. Now, don't forget, if you'd like to find out more about Business Connections Live, you can just simply go online to Business Connections Live. There's over 300 hours of great content there for somebody that's in business. Everything that you want to find out about, simply just go along to the site. If you're looking to raise funds or money for your organisation, then you will find a program all about that. Have you ever thought about being an executive director or the like? Maybe that's something you've been thinking about. Once again, there's a program about that too, along with the likes of sales technique and also marketing and social media. You can find all that out simply by going to the website and going to businessconnectionslive.com. You can follow us, of course, on Twitter as well, and also go along to our Facebook page, where you can always leave comments on each and every one of the programs. So all you got to do is, to find out more about Business Connections Live, is to go along to the website. Oh, finally, the last thing, we've got a great downloadable book that you can get. It's called How to Handle the Media. We do media, thank you, shut the door. We do media training courses here as well at Business Connections Live, where we bring organisations and customers in, and we sit them down, we put them through the rigmarole of being in a live TV studio and also a radio studio, and how to be interviewed and how to get the most out of that for their organisation. Now, if you've got somebody that is trained in that, imagine what that's going to do to your business when you are in a crisis situation. It could actually raise the value of the business as opposed to, well, ruining the value of the business. If you want more details about that, go to our website at businessconnectionslive.com, or give us a call on 01784 256 777. He's back there, he's done the microphoning. Or you can drop us an email to studio@businessconnectionslive.com. Well done, Gordon. Did a good job there. He was creeping about the studio while I was rattling away. Okay, best ways to deploy digital other technologies for mutual benefit, because you talked about AI, you talked about that. I'm not a great lover of IVR systems, yet there seems to be there seems to be a lot of use of IVR. Long menus that go on forever, forget where you are, long hanging on to, hate IVR. Do you not feel that AI might bring a little bit more of that to us, and that people really, all they want to hear is a phone to be picked up and someone go, hello, I'm real?
I think if the phone is picked up, you're absolutely right. But what you've already told us is the phone isn't picked up.
No, because they're very busy.
As often or as friendly or as frequently as possible. So it is a bit of a conundrum. You're absolutely right about IVR. I've been involved with IVR, or I say involved with it. I've seen it and worked with organizations trying to make sense of it for probably close to 30 years.
We better say IVR, interactive voice recognition,
voice response, yes,
on the phone, yeah.
Those dreaded announcements you get. And what's extremely frustrating about that is most of it is down to the design of the menu structure, like many other things in life. It's what we were talking about earlier about process. So that's the problem with that. I think that we'll leave that aside for now, because I think we're seeing less and less of that. Organizations still using it, of course, but I think AI will replace that. And I think the fact is that because AI has, I believe, so much more capability in terms of understanding what you're saying, because one of the frustrations with even IVRs that are voice activated or voice recognition, how often do you get, "Did you say Steve?" And you go, right, yes. I'm embarrassed to say, my wife wouldn't have a problem with this. She'd understand this. Screaming down the phone, "Yes, and so yes, I can see that. But I think AI, partly for a couple of reasons. Firstly, if you're having a chat session, you're typing it in, so it's being able to do that. So I think the technology has moved on. I would say that.
The problem with that, the problem is that you are targeting you.
Yes, I agree.
So, for instance, we'll name and shame Ealing Council. My Ealing Council expect everybody in the world to have email addresses and access to the internet. My dad, God love him, doesn't know what either of those two things are, even though it's been explained to him 100 times.
Yes, of course.
He doesn't have internet access.
Yes.
So the services that are targeting the elderly, the only way you have access to talk to anybody is via the internet or email, of which he doesn't have. And
I think your point earlier, and Jerry's made it, is if you start with a technical solution, you lose the human side. And another good example of that was I went to a university site recently and went to the car park. I had a few minutes spare to try and navigate my way around the campus, and was trying to pay the car park, and of course it's automated. I couldn't get a signal on the phone, so I couldn't download the app. They gave me a number eventually that I could on one of the signs, so I phoned that and said, "Please be aware, we'd rather you use the app. If not, it will allow 10 minutes for us to take your details so that we can register your car." And I thought, I want to be here for an hour. The old system you've replaced, I turned up, I had 50 pence, put it in the meter, it paid for the car park for an hour, I went. It meant if I didn't have the change sometimes, that was an inconvenience, but we've got contactless. I don't need to set up a relationship with a car park provider I'm only going to use once for an hour. And I think that's where, as I say, if you start from the inside out, you start to design processes that look logical, look efficient, but ultimately they cause frustration for the end user. And
you park in any car park round here, and you've got to put your registration number in, inside leg measurements, and your date. I mean, it is the registration number. I can see what they're trying to do. They're trying to stop tickets being passed between cars, but the amount that must be saving on the amount of time it wastes their citizens, it must be phenomenal.
Well, I think the thing about what you just mentioned, in as you've suggested, when I go back to Canada, which I'll probably do,
and stay there, Jerry.
Well, one of the case studies that we're looking at, and we're going to be talking about when we get more involved in this, is the City of Toronto, where I spent half of my life. The City of Toronto brought out an initiative last year called Digital Literacy Day.
Yeah.
They've now expanded that to Digital Literacy Week. And
easy for you to say.
Yes, well, literacy has never been my strong point. But this is what people were, what you were talking about, is they're encouraging, they recognize everyone doesn't have internet access. Now, of course, everyone might not also be mobile. So I understand as, we become a more, aging society. But the idea is that they offer services. All the public libraries have free internet access. You can go and do all the things that what you're expected to do or being asked to do by many councils. You can do it there. And I think the point there is they recognize again that everyone won't necessarily buy into that. They can't all just jump on a bus and go to the local city hall. But they're recognizing that they do need to react to the fact that everyone doesn't. And I think that's the first stage. As David says, it's about how do we make sure that the people that we want to connect with are able to connect with us. Now, if that means they still have to phone us, fine. If that means that they still have to find some other way, we have to continue to do that, but slowly evolving it to a place where again, it's just about demand. If the people that can use those services are encouraged to do it more. So if we have this interaction with our citizens, if we have these groups, whatever you want to call them, focus groups, people coming together. This is how, so just as an example, one of the things they're doing in Toronto is that they're using a common system for parking everywhere. So you don't have to have a different system if you park here, or if you park there, if you park there. So you may have to sign up once, you may have to go through some of the challenges you went through, but once you've done that, it's the same system wherever you go. So it's this consistency, this commonality. This again is what reduces demand, because what David went through clearly increased demand on that organization. He had to make a phone call, they had to deal with it, and if they'd had to take your details, another 10 minutes on the phone. So this is what we're talking about. It's not perfect, we know there's lots of work to do, but I think it's about being able to introduce these ideas and being unbiased. We're not aligned with any technology organization. We're fortunate enough to know many of them. It's really about just saying, look, here's something you could try. So we're not saying buy this system or buy this system. We're saying here's some ideas. Here's some ways we can do that. Let's do a proof of concept. Most organizations will do that willingly, and helping organizations test things with real people to see how well they work. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. And just one final point on the you mentioned in your earlier part, conversation, not confrontation. And this is something I'm very focused on, both in the public sector and private sector. Helping people. When you say things, when you reach a public sector or any company, and the first thing they say to you is, what's your council tax number, or some other inane piece of identification. I know my name, I know my phone number, I know my postal code, most of these things. But if they start with that, so if I've got a complaint, my bins weren't collected today, what's your address? Well, of course, they need to know that. But, oh, Mr. Brown, I'm really sorry to hear that. Perhaps the bin man fell off the wagon. I mean, I don't know what. But,
fell off the wagon.
Exactly. So all I'm saying is that if they start in a way that encourages conversation, as opposed to something that just simply confirms your feeling about the intransigence of the people you're dealing with, it's a so much better way of doing it. Again, it takes time, but it works.
I think that there's an internal business case that has to be made for any proposition, but I think it also has to be tested against what's the public service case? How willing are you to give your details for parking? How much time are you prepared to spend to give those details? And I think, as you say, the single-use scheme is perhaps a bit more acceptable than one I've got to use different types of car park providers every time I go and re-enter the same information, which comes back to the trust issue about, are you going to keep that data now? How secure is it? So there's a risk for both sides there. But I think one of the things that we see is quite rightly, different professions think and talk and act in different ways. And whenever you design a process or a solution or a service, a large range of those have to come together. But we don't often have that conversation to explore the people side of it, to say, I don't understand what you mean by that. We go straight to process because that's quite neutral, objective, and we feel quite safe doing that. And I think actually one of the things we'd like to see more is just understand why people are around the table, not just because you have a certain role and that puts you there. That may not give you the automatic skill set. My son did a work experience a while ago, and we've always grown up going to zoos and taking him there. And so he did a work experience a few years ago with a website designer and SEO company. And he was talking to one of the team there one day, and they said, I've never understood zoos. And so he looked at him and said, well, what do you mean you don't understand zoos? He said, well, if I want to see what a zebra looks like, I type it in and zebra, done. And I thought, that's fine. That's obviously his own way of understanding the world. But it's very different to somebody that's been used to going to zoos, observing animals and just enjoying them. And I think that's how, if you don't have that conversation to recognise that difference, then whatever comes out the other end is already compromised.
We're not the same, are we? Do you know, it's been a fascinating hour. It's been the beginning of it was an exciting hour, but here we are. We've hit the end of the hour. It's been really insightful, and there was so much more that we could have talked about as well. I always ask our guests to give us their closing thoughts, the key takeaways. I'm going to ask you individually, if I may. Jerry, you're the old hand, so I'm going to ask you to go first. So to give David a working example, he's now going to say everything you want to say. So straight down camera number 4, which is that one there. the one on the end. So who you are, where you're from,
Yeah.
the airwaves are all yours.
Thank you. Well, Jerry Brown from the Citizen Connection.
Oh, sorry, you're on camera one. Sorry, my mistake. That one there.
Wow,
there we go.
good
Start
thing.
again,
Yes.
Jerry. Sorry.
This is living proof of how we adapt to situations and what we're talking about. So Jerry Brown from the Citizen Connection. We are absolutely dedicated to helping both citizens and the public sector in building better relationships. And that starts, surprisingly enough, with talking to each other. And we're encouraging organizations and the public to get together. I realize this won't be a brand new idea, whether you want to call them town hall meetings or whatever it is. But I think looking at really specific issues, looking at things that as citizens, what are the things that we think are important? Because as David has been saying all along, both the citizen side and the public sector side have different views on what's important to them. So I think the most important starting point is really understanding what is important for each other, what is important, what services will make a difference. If I do this one really well, doesn't mean you should do one badly, but what's most important? And of course, as Steve has just said, we're all different. So please start talking. Let us help you make those connections. And I believe that as I'm very much a glass half full guy, we can make this a better world.
Fantastic, Jerry Brown and David. The airwaves are always, this time it is that camera at the end, number 4. Just who you are, where you're from, that'd be great. And the key takeaways as you see it today.
Okay. David Wells, co-founder of the Citizen Connection. I think one of the things that I'd really like people to think about is, as we hear much more about the technology, the fourth industrial revolution and 5G, all of the changes that will bring about. I know many people are waiting to see what its capability is, how that will actually play out and what that will do for our services. Jerry and I from the Citizen Connection would encourage you to actually think about the people side of that now, because the workforce that you'll need and the skills that they will have and the way in which they work will fundamentally change, as will the type of leadership that they will need to support them. We'll need to see a lot more collaboration. We often hear that people are the greatest assets, and that's true, not just within the organisation, but actually the people we serve. And certainly in the public sector space, they are the people that fund and are there as recipients of the service, at the very reason for being. And I think as we go through that, we must never forget that creation of services and products are a human process. And at every point of interaction, there is the chance for us to enhance or to actually build in risk by failing to have the conversations and gaining the common ground that we need to, so that we do provide something that is valuable and works for everyone in that pathway.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. If you want to find out more about the Citizen Connection, you can go to their website. It is thecitizenconnection.co.uk. Some information there about why change is needed. You'll find out more about the guys as well, who they are, what services they provide, consulting, speaking, workshops. There's a blog as well with some good stuff on it, and a little bit about our 2 guests on today's show. That's thecitizenconnection.co.uk. That practically wraps up today's programme. Once again, my thanks to Jerry Brown and David Waiters as well. Well, coming up on future programmes, who we got lined up for you? Martine Robbins is going to be joining me. She's from the HR department. If you're looking for an outsourced HR team, then Martine could well be the lady to talk to. If you're looking for a sales director, then it's got to be Antonio Falco. He'll be on the show very shortly. The award-winning inspirational speaker, Penny Hassan, will be joining me on the programme. She's going to be teaching you how to be a little bit famous. Warren Knight as well, professional speaker on his upcoming brand new book, and also Deborah Hume as well, who is a neuroscientist, will be joining me on the show as well. But for today, that practically wraps up today's program. Thank you very much. It's been lovely back, having had a month off, but here we are. We're back live again next Monday at around about 12 o'clock. But until we do it all again from the 3 of us, thanks for watching. See you next week. Bye for now. Bye bye.
Business Connections Live, the UK's leading online business channel.